like that.
Okay, what we might do is make a slow start. How's that sound for everyone? And then we'll get the ball rolling and have a bit of a chat. So welcome, first of all. Hopefully everyone is having a great Thursday. I was only going to say Wednesday, but it is Thursday already. And we're here to have a bit of a chapter-led conversation. I am the head or chair of Victoria Tasmania WIL Australia chapter. My name is Wayne Reed, and today I'm part of the team along with Julian, Leonie, Rachel, and Julie. They're going to talk about some research into WIL Communities of Practice. So welcome, and let's get things started. I've already jumped ahead to the next slide, essentially by introducing the team as I say hello to everyone. So here's where everyone's dialing in from or joining the project from. And first of all, before we get too far into it, is a little bit of acknowledgement of country. So I'm dialing in today from Geelong, which is Wadawurrung Land, and Wadawurrung Land runs from Werribee, or the Werribee River, all the way out past Ballarat, towards Colac area, and then the whole Bellarine Peninsula. It's a very special part of the world. I'm reminded of the care and nurturing that's happened on this land for tens of thousands of years. And there are significant markers that place this key areas of this location as places of education, which is a key point that I like to remember as we take classes and we go through our work at Deakin for me. So I encourage you to think about where you're dialing in from and the traditional landowners of the lands that you're joining us from today. With that in mind, I'm going to pass to Julian, who is going to talk about some of the insights about how we come together as teams to share knowledge.
Cool. Thank you very much, Wayne. So what I'm just going to do first is orientate everyone to what we're doing here today with a bit of, a short discussion around the background and objectives for what we've been doing over the last year or so with the research into WIL Communities of Practice. So WIL Communities of Practice are, of course, important mechanisms by which institutions share knowledge in relation to the practice and execution of WIL in universities, because as we know, WIL is a very complex form of learning, and with all the, I guess, risk and legal elements, among much else, there's obviously a need for that kind of knowledge and institutional knowledge and practice to be disseminated, and WIL Communities of Practice are a potentially important mechanism by which that occurs. So what we're going to do here today is report on a small sample of the research findings that we've gathered over the last 12 months or so, but without trying to repeat too much of what was presented at the ACEN seminar in 2024, but with a particular emphasis on leading a discussion in order to gain further insight into what would be good practice in WIL Communities of Practice, with a view to this also being useful for any higher education institution as it either creates or evolves its own WIL Community of Practice. So, slide. Let me just tell you a little bit about the research methods very briefly. So click, Wayne. Sorry, there's going to be a couple of clicks on this slide. So this research took place in 2024 and also is taking place in the first quarter of 2025. And basically, there are two data collection mechanisms. One is a 27-question survey, which had 29 respondents from each of which it was from a different institution of higher education in Australia. Click. And the survey largely replicates a 2018 survey, which was of also in relation to WIL Communities of Practice. Click. Then there were also qualitative semi-structured interviews, which are approximately 30 minutes in length, and we did 7 of those. Click. And the questions, there were a number of questions which interviewees were invited to discuss. Some of those were about levels of engagement in WIL Communities of Practice at their university, the kinds of institutional support that they received from the institution, and how they saw the WIL Community of Practice changing over time. And just a note that ethics clearance was gotten from RMIT University for this research. I'm just going to talk through 3 of the, I guess, slightly more quantitative findings from the research. The first of which is, does your institution even have a WIL Community of Practice? And I'm just going to present on the 2024 findings, not the 2018 ones. And as you can see here, there is a large percentage that have said yes. But then also one of the differences between, I guess, this round of research and the previous was the increase in communities of practice that are not just WIL specific, but where WIL is part of a wider ambit of that community of practice. Meanwhile, of those who responded, there's still about 20% who don't have a WIL community of practice. Then a further question is around the level of institutionalization or formalization of that WIL community of practice. In 2024, we found that of those who responded, only 6 have formal terms of reference, and twice that have no terms of reference for the WIL community of practice at all. And click. And the last bit of quantitative finding which I'll share now is a question around the extent to which convening a WIL community of practice is part of the respondents' formal workload and responsibility. And as you can see here, a large proportion is don't have it in their workload and it's not formally recognized, whereas a much smaller proportion do formally have it as part of their formal workload allocation. So to share a few more insights into, I guess, the more qualitative findings from the research, I'd like to pass over to Rachel.
Thanks, Julian, and g'day everyone. And I think it was interesting just to have, we had short conversations and a number of us were involved in conducting interviews in the research team. So I think we all actually did a few, didn't we? But I thought I'd just include, or we thought we'd include some examples to, I guess, help generate some discussion today in the breakout groups following the presentation. So the first one here, I guess one of the things was, and maybe this is obvious, but the influence of institutional context on success of community practices. I probably should have added that in there, but this was one example, I think, where clearly there's some strategy for the university around community of practices there. So the quote, the idea of having something a bit more formal, so those terms of reference that that Julian just alluded to. So there was some history back to 2022, and it really gave them momentum, and it was on the Vice Chancellor's to-do list, and therefore they started to create and there was that led by the executive leadership and the team. So there was lots of diversity among the 7 interviewees that around the organisation, the way they organise their institutional practice, and those success stories. And I guess some other drivers that we saw from interviewees who were organisers of community practices were things like the idea again of new strategy, helping to drive connection, to have a shared understanding, to build staff capacity. Those were the common themes around drivers. And I think also what we also saw there is not only WIL as being the common theme or the name of the community practice, but we saw increasingly the use of employability community of practices as well. Thanks, Wayne. Okay, second sort of, I guess, theme there, online forums are a necessary component of a WIL or employability community practice. So this first quote here, and I think that's one of the benefits of being online now, is that people don't have to attend, they can watch it later. I think there's a nature of it hybrid, meaning that Teams really does, or really is the default, particularly for communities of practice, and in particular ours wanting to be inclusive. So I think some of the key components of this was how Teams, you know, most of our, certainly universities are starting to use Teams in their community of practices, because that's really one of the tools that our universities have as well. So it really does appear that Teams has been integrated, or online forums are being integrated into the organisation of community practices. This idea of the need to have flexibility of how participants engage, and indeed the flexibility does provide a much more inclusive approach to participants. I think Yammer was also mentioned as an online tool, and I'll be interested to see in our discussions afterwards about whether there are other online tools that some of you are using in your community of practices. Thanks, Wayne. Okay, now, creating a space for informal interactions. This came up from quite a few of the interviewees. So while we're integrating, I guess, these online forums into our community practices, going much more online post COVID, we certainly realise that there's a need for those informal conversations, those water cooler conversations, as interviewee one said here, those abilities to have those incidental conversations that really connect and are meaningful for participants, and then perhaps in the future lead to those research conversations, those practice conversations, improving capability among staff involved in the community of practice as well. I think the other thing there around other participants were talking around perhaps not using Teams, but also using or creating other forms of having hybrid meetings, although that was the challenge for some organizers of communities of practice, because facilitating hybrid environments or hybrid meetings was challenging. So yeah, next one, please. Community practice levels of engagement. So I've included 2 quotes here, I think, to highlight a couple of themes that we saw around the level of engagement. So we asked organisers of community of practices to sort of, are there any challenges? I guess on the most part, the organisers, sorry, I can't even say the word today, organisers were really positive, and they felt that they really didn't struggle to find participants to present their learnings, to present innovative practices, to talk to hot topics. But I think over time, when we asked about, what would you like to see in the future, I think the second quote here really highlights the need to move to that sort of self-perpetuating model, and hopefully that over time a community of practice gains that momentum where there's a range of people contributing and organising, not just 1 or 2 people, which you could see, I guess, with some of the themes in some of the interviewees. Thank you. Thanks, Wayne. And then lastly, I think we asked that question around what could WIL Australia or ACEN, WILA, provide, what sort of support could they provide? And I think some of these suggestions were around helping both professional and academic staff, and a mix of one or the other, who were organising these forums or community of practices, to actually access good practices, to find out what other institutions are doing. So I think that's the connection there. So tapping into perhaps some of these suggestions, I should say, we're tapping into WILA professional development webinars like today to access external speakers, aligning WILA critical conversations and webinars to institutional meetings, providing links and updates around regular links and updates from WILA into these online forums so that everyone can learn a little bit more about what's happening in terms of ACEN or WILA events, supporting generally the development of community practices within institutions, and lastly, I guess, to encourage institutional community practices to take up research on their community practices. That certainly came up from one participant. So while the research team perhaps won't be doing a report as such, we have been doing these webinars, and this is the 3rd, I guess, in terms of this research project. And I'm going to hand on to Leonie now, because what we've done is create some terms of reference or terms of some guidelines, that will help. So thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Obviously, you're not going to have time to read all of this right now, but yes, there was some requests. Could WIL Australia help out with some guidelines around how to develop a WIL community of practice terms of reference? So what I've done is pulled that together, and you won't be able to see it here. There will be a link. We're going to move on to a Padlet soon. There'll be a link to the terms of reference there. And then at the end of today's webinar, when Vanessa sends everyone who's registered out the link to the video, she'll also send out these draft guidelines for developing WIL Communities Practice Terms of Reference, which is a mouthful. And on there will be my email address, and you can use the Padlet so people can get back to me with any feedback. That I'll tidy it all up, and it will end up being a resource on the WIL Australia website. I might struggle a bit for a few more months by saying ACEN, because I have been saying it, I'm sure, for the last, 15 years of my life. So it's going to take a while for me to get there. But yeah, so hopefully these terms of reference or just some guidelines on how to develop them can help you out if you don't have a community of practice, or if you already do, but maybe you feel the need to tighten it up a bit or change the way that you work. So that will be available. Thanks, Wayne. Okay, now I'm going to lead us in. We're going to break into groups, or am I handing over? Julie's leaning forward. Julie. She can't hear you, Julie. That's fine.
Yep, I believe we're going to go out into our breakout groups now. So.
That's fine. It's hard to hear you. Is anybody else having trouble hearing Julie, or is it just me?
She's very quiet.
Go through this. That's okay. So the breakout groups, we're going to pose 4 questions, and we hope that in your group you can discuss 1 or 2. We don't expect you to get through the whole 4 of these questions. We're just going to randomly assign people into groups, and please think about your responses and add to the conversation. Hopefully we'll have somebody in there to take some notes that we can report back, but these are just some discussion questions which have come out of the research findings. And Wayne is going to do his magic and send us all off into groups for some discussion. There we go. Here's the questions. So in your WIL community practice, and can everyone please not all do question 1? Because that's what happens, doesn't it? Just, mix it up a bit. In your WIL community practice, what has worked well that you would recommend to others to consider adopting? The importance of informal spaces, as Rachel mentioned, so has come out. How does your institution create these spaces, or how would you build such a water cooler opportunities for that chit chat? The third one, what are the features or tools used in your institution's WIL community of practice, and what are their strengths and weaknesses? And 4, so presenters with expertise or particular insights are important in WIL communities of practice. How can WIL Australia enable the presence of different voices and expertise gaps in your institution? So that's what we'd like you to have a think about. So pick which of 1 or 2 of those questions to discuss in your group and use the Padlet.
Okay, everyone, ready to go into the breakout groups? Have fun and happy chatting. See you in about 15 minutes.
Thanks.